The race is on, and with Formula One's team principal lineup more volatile than ever, we ask what makes a great leader and how much has the role changed over the years. All in a bid to decide who is F1's best team principal. I'm Edd Straw, and joining me to take on this challenge are Mark Hughes and Nate Saunders. Well, Nate, we'll have to come to you first from ESPN F1, of course. Should we get the painful bit out of the way?
Yeah, absolutely. The cringeworthy bit. Do you want me to... I should have magicked it up out of nowhere.
Yeah, if you're a professional book promoter.
Yeah, absolute nightmare. I was halfway here and realised the one thing I should have bought. I do have a book out at the moment. Like I assume most people you have on at the moment can plug similar. Lando Norris book on his championship-winning season last year. 100 pictures as well from Getty Images, and just a really nice kind of journal, I think, of his title-winning year.
So lots of photos, not so much of your bit.
Basically, yeah, they just said, look, we just need words to go with these photos. That's all they wanted. So hopefully the words do it justice.
Excellent. Well, we've got the plug out of the way.
Exactly.
That's obviously a regular Formula One journalist. So,
but that's the first time someone said that. So that's nice.
Yeah, you are part of the club, as it were. So regular in the media sense.
And last time we did this show, the only time I've been on the race podcast, we talked about how Carlos Sainz hadn't had a podium or a good result for Williams, and then the next week he literally 7 days later went and got one. So maybe it can bring some similar magic.
So you're a good omen.
Okay. Well, hopefully. Or maybe that was it. Maybe that was got it all out of my system there.
Well, let's do this as a test, see if we can replicate the results. And Mark Hughes, we're going to talk about team principles today. It's an interesting topic, isn't it? Because the team principal, it's very nebulous as an actual job title, isn't it?
It's evolved, hasn't it? It used to be the person who founded the team and who owned the team and who was boss, and he do whatever he saw fit within his budget and within his own vision or their own vision. And I think it's as the sport has expanded and it becomes such a complex management job to control all these different departments and thousands of people. It's become the team principal. Capital T, capital P, has become a recognised role as it's a position. It's an employed position and within the management structure, and he's basically there to run the team on a day-to-day basis and at the track, and he's the face of the team. But it's quite often they have someone above them, an owner or a CEO or COO.
And even within that, it's very different in terms of the exact job that they may do. It's changed massively, as well as there being amazingly high turnover. That's the really strange thing, isn't it, Nate? How quickly things change. Basically, everybody apart from Toto Wolff, the team principal, has changed in the past few years, and even Toto Wolff has only been there for sort of 10, 15 years, less than 15 years, in fact. So The days when you'd have decades of these team principles have pretty much gone.
Yeah, they are. And I mean, when you sent me the list through and you actually, to that point, you read the names there and you compare to even at the start of the last rule change, it's completely different, and people moving around. And there's not the other thing that brings out weirdly is that there's not actually a giant pool of available managers. You'd think that there'd be loads of team principals or people with team principal experience, but there's a lot of moving around, a lot of people moving up positions. So when somebody does leave a job, it's not like a football manager job where there's suddenly 16 candidates that you could look at. It feels like still quite a small pool of people you can pick from, despite the fact that the turnover is quite, is quite quick, like you said.
Yeah, which is bizarre given the job is in some ways nebulous or at least very adaptable in terms of what it actually involves. But the reason I sent you that list is we're going to go through the 11 team principles, but we're going to approach it in a slightly different way. We're going to try and answer the question, who's the best team principal? And to do that, we've picked out 6 different categories that cover elements of their job to talk through that and come up with our top 3. We'll use F1 points. We'll agree a top 3 in each one. We'll tot it up in my advanced notebook here that has 6 very well drawn out columns and work out who comes out on top. But the main reason really is to kind of delve into the jobs a little bit and understand a bit more about it. So we're going to start off with category 1, politics, Nate. And that is basically fighting for your team off track. Do you think the Piranha Club cliche still holds true today?
I don't think it holds true in the same way. I think it will always be attached to Formula One because it's kind of that romantic idea of the paddock and you were talking about when people would be there for a decade, you'd have your Ron Dennis's, Jean Todt, people leading their team on track, but also went into the meetings behind the scenes and were banging on the table. I think the reason it doesn't exist so much is because the king of that Piranha Club was Bernie Ecclestone, and I think the way he ruled was to set the teams kind of against each other. You needed to be politically quite astute to be in the team principal role. think what Liberty Media have done a little bit more is ruled by consensus a bit more. There's this agreement, I think, that a rising tide does lift all boats, and sometimes the teams don't need to necessarily be, like in 2009, kind of at loggerheads with each other, trying to rip shreds out of each other, even though that does still happen, as we've seen in Netflix. So I think the role has changed a bit because Liberty have been able to kind of roll that back a little bit. If we look at the way F1 were kind of all united in terms of the Cadillac/Andretti entry, it was all one unified front. I think Liberty Media have been very good at doing that, but we still see Toto Wolff, Christian Horner on Netflix episodes going back and forth. But those two guys, to me, were really the last two throwbacks from that era that you mentioned of the Piranha Club being in its pomp. If you think about the reason I say 2009, I just watched the Disney Plus documentary on the Brawn season, and that's obviously the what's running underneath it. And the characters in that were all very politically astute. You had Briatore, that was kind of original Briatore as well, not the sort of watered down version that we've got now with Alpine. But politics had to be part of their job. Ron Dennis, etc. as well. So I don't think it's as important as it used to be, but I think the cliche still exists, and actually because it's diminished, being politically quite astute, I think now actually has almost more impact than it may have done before, because you can actually probably make a bit more of an impact. I think, if we look at this rule set, Mercedes, have probably ended up with a rule set that's quite, advantageous to where to their skill set. And Toto Wolff, I think, is a good example of somebody who's been quite politically astute in his career. So I think it still does apply, but it's not quite that romanticized version that we knew 10, 15 years ago. But
I think also now that we have this system whereby you are a stakeholder in the team, and each team has a percentage of the ownership of the whole entity, and your place is reserved. You're not fighting for your potential survival of your team, which you were before this system came in. There was probably 3 or 4 very wealthy teams, and the rest of them absolutely on the very verge of being insolvent. And so, obviously it took on any arguments about regulations and money splits, and they took on an entirely more important dimension. So, there's that's sort of made it a little bit less poisonous perhaps than it was. But it's also, I think, you still had it with when Christian Horner was in. He was very, the most. Is he the most recent ex-team principal? There's been such a turnover.
Wheatley, I suppose.
Wheatley, of course.
He's the most recent.
A recent ex-team principal, Christian Horner, who was his style was very much old school. He would go in there and represent his team in arguments with the FIA or with other with rival team bosses, and I think that his disappearance from the scene, which probably temporary, I believe, has lent it a less edgy atmosphere. But I think it's still there. It is still the team principal's job to represent the team's best interests, and sometimes that will come down to arguing your case if you feel you're being disadvantaged. And so, I think that's still an important quality, to have that political astuteness and that willingness to fight your cause.
Yeah, it's maybe a more subtle kind of art now, isn't it? In that there are some very politically astute operators who people watching on the outside might not realise how active they are. I know somebody like Toto Wolff's good on the politics, but I think people will see that because he can be quite vocal. But then you've got people like Fred Vasseur, for example, who isn't the most attention-grabbing publicly. Very occasionally he can be, but he's a good example of someone who's a very sharp operator behind the scenes, and you have to be as a Ferrari team principal, don't you?
Well, and we've seen that with the starts issue this year. We were both in that press conference in China where he just said, I consider the matter closed. We raised it last year. They were very vocal about it behind the scenes, and then it was just a open shut case. And I think you're right. Fred Vasseur doesn't come across as this very bombastic Christian Horner or Toto Wolff figure, but there's actually kind of a steely, political operator behind there. And I actually think he's gone into the Ferrari ecosystem and works quite well because he's an outsider but still has that understanding of it. So I think I know we're going to dish some points out for these guys later, but he's maybe a left field one for a good haul of points in this category.
I think you also got to consider that not every because every team is structured differently, and then to an extent you're structuring the team around the individual talents that you have, and not every team principal is required in that role. For example, Andrea Stella at McLaren, he's not required in that role. That's looked after by Zach Brown. So he's more of a managing team principal in rather than the traditional one.
And maybe you get the same with like at Racing Bulls, where you've got Alan Permain as the team principal and you've got Peter Beyer there.
Yeah, exactly.
So it is interesting how often these roles are sliced and diced and spread around. So there will be some team bosses in this who don't score, aren't in the top three, not necessarily even because they're not very good at it automatically, it's just because they're not doing it. So that's kind of, and it is interesting because you've got people like James Vowles as well, who's I think good on the political side, but in a very sort of modern C-suite style, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
Very corporate style, but he was intrinsic to lobbying to get that cost cap capex increase. He was really corralling people. You've got people like Graham Loudon at Cadillac, who was very active behind the scenes in terms of getting Cadillac that entry, which was a very difficult process in terms of requiring tremendous patience and work behind the scenes and just making sure that the door was broken down. So there's lots and lots of different ways to look at it. So if we're trying to come up with our top three, we're going to try and come up with a consensus between the three of us. I think probably the ones that stand out, Wolf, Vasseur, maybe Vowles. I'd say Loudon's a contender.
I think Loudon's Loudon's a really good left field shout. He came, that was a tough job to get Cadillac in the way that it showed a degree of operating with that, with that political nous in mind, and coming from his background as well, not a heavyweight quote unquote in terms of the team he was at before, but obviously knows the paddock, knew exactly how to operate. When at one point it was a pretty unpopular proposition being in charge of that operation. So yeah, I might put him third for me, but I don't know how we want to split it up.
We're doing third.
We're doing 1, 2, 3, for each category.
So we're starting off with third, or are we going into?
Well, whatever, we can shuffle them around. Mm-hmm. We've got a provisional third for Loudon. I mean, Wolf and Vasseur are two very strong contenders for me.
Yeah, for me, it's Wolf would be number one. Just longevity helps there as well. He's been around for so long, but he's kind of navigated Mercedes through now a third regulation cycle, and it just always feels like he's in the thick of it, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And
it does.
He's kind of the chief operator.
Yeah, he's the heaviest weight of the heavyweights, I would say. Yes, so I agree. You'd have to put him number one in that category. Vasseur, Matteo Binotto, I think, is very influential behind the scenes and a bit of a disruptor sometimes, and can easily be underestimated. And I think, for me, he'd be in the top three.
Yeah, Binotto's a good shot, and actually, did clash with Wolf in the past. They obviously, when it was Ferrari and Mercedes, there was two big heavyweights there going together. So I think Binotto's a good call, and I think anyone who's come through that Ferrari system has just by default has to be very good at the politics. It's kind of that's number one kind of job requirement even today for Ferrari is navigating the world of Formula One. Yeah,
I think I'd agree with that. So we go Wolf. Do you want to go Wolf, Binotto, Loudon, or Wolf, Binotto, Vasseur? Those are probably the choices.
Let's put Loudon in, so we're not over. It's not too Ferrari or ex-Ferrari guys.
Okay, go Wolf, Binotto, Loudon. That'll do. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put them in. I'm doing a little F1 points table as we go along.
Nice.
Do you get 25 points for a win? Or
Yeah, 20, 25, 15, 18, 15.
18, 15.
Now, somebody's going to ask why we're not doing everyone.
Laps.
Well, fastest laps in September. There's a certain amount of time limit, so we're going with top three, and mainly it's a way to do it. But they're all to a greater or lesser degree politically adept. I think you'll say there's nobody who's incompetent. Right, the next one we've got is team building, Mark. We're trying to talk about team building in the wider sense because we want a manageable number of categories. So I'm thinking recruitment, getting everyone pulling in the same direction, and culture's a word that's always used, and it can mean almost anything and nothing and everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think getting everyone to pull in the same direction, because none of these teams lack talent. They've all got masses of talent in them, but they're all very individualistic people in the main, and so getting them all to pull in the same direction is absolutely key to getting a team firing on all cylinders, and that's what the inspiration and discipline, I suppose, of a a good team principal.
And it's got so much harder, hasn't it? Because
Yeah.
when it was a small team, you could almost do it personally.
You would know everyone.
Yeah, and you can do that just in the way you present yourself.
Yeah.
But with these massive operations,
No, it's departments.
you have to kind of imbue everything with that culture. It's a much bigger task. You can't kind of wing it. It has to be structural.
It has to leak down through all the departments, and it has to be the same. And you have to make sure there's no silos between each department, and you have to be very alert to that happening, because all those heads of department are very ambitious people themselves usually, and so they want to be seen to be doing a good job, and sometimes that's at the expense of another department. That's something that the team, an ideal team leader needs to be very on top of. For me, Toto is extremely good at that. We talked to Toto Wolff again. He's always talked about the no blame culture. He was the one that popularised that in the Formula One paddock,
which is not about not admitting problems.
No,
it's about blame the problem, not
it's not
whoever's
personalised.
caused the
It's
problem.
not personalising.
Understand where the problem came from as well, right?
It's making it not personal. It's making it let's attack the problem.
Which means that let's say if you've made a mistake, it's much easier just to put your hand up and say, "Oh, right, hang on a minute, we've got to sort this." Whereas there are times when people sort of either try and cover it up or just hope it slides.
Yeah.
So, and you can really see, can't you, the teams that do have that no blame culture versus the ones that maybe there is more of that exists. You can see when things go wrong. It's just the messaging that comes out isn't always. And I think Fred Vasseur's done a good job at Ferrari. That was always the knock on Ferrari. I think he's come in with a bit more of a calming. We kind of talked about it in the politics section, but not being part of the Ferrari system, it means he's not really got skin in the game already from 20 years of service at Red Bull, which I think at Ferrari, which I think Binotto did have, and then that played into his leadership when he was finally had the top job. He had allies, he had people within the team that weren't his allies as well, whereas Vasseur's been able to come in and distance himself from that a bit. So yeah, I think that's the interesting part of it. And then you've got someone like Andrea Stella, who arguably doesn't have to worry about the team building as much because Zach Brown does that in terms of that overarching kind of umbrella role. I'm sure Andrea Stella is front and centre in a lot of that hiring decision. I know, and I know that he is, but he can still defer to the man above him as well. So he doesn't have to worry about it as much as he might have had to if he was the sole leader of the team. And I think that probably frees him up to do a lot of what the rest of the job is.
But he's quite good, Stella, in terms of the culture, I think.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking of when they were ramping up and getting better and better. I remember him kind of emphasising that he really wanted to instill in the team. He didn't even really emphasise it, it was more implied it. But it was very easy for a team to always be building for like 3 years' time will be great. And it could have been easy last year for 25 to say, well, we're really focused on 26. But they was like, we don't know how often we'll get this opportunity. So we need everyone to realise they need to be at their best now and get those results while still doing stuff. So I think he's quite good on that side of things in terms of kind of making everybody live and breathe that competitiveness, which I guess is part of the culture as well.
I think so, and a lot of that, and I think we'll come on to it later, but the way he handled the Papaya rules back and forth over the last 2 years wasn't always perfect, but I think he handled that in a way that a lot of other team bosses might have struggled to manage in the same way. I don't think it would have been as calm internally as it ended up being, and I think a lot of that is down to the character and personality of Stella, but also his experience of those Ferrari teams, that he was part of that maybe didn't have that much harmony between the drivers behind the scenes.
I have to say, when it comes to scoring this, I feel like Wolff's just going to end up being on top. And one of the reasons for that is there were things that team has done over a long period of time. For example, remember that phase when they were putting all sorts of people up on the podium, by which I mean normally you put up the team principal or the technical director or race engine, some of them more engineering, but they started putting up all sorts of people. And I mean that in a good way because they really tried to instill in everybody this idea that there's kind of, it's not just like you have the racing team and everything else is peripheral. It's like, well, the race team needs to understand how important the commercial side is and the media team is, and everybody needs to understand the importance of the hospitality and all of these things and how it all fits together. And they tried to do cross-departmental things to really capture that. And I think that was a really good example of how Wolff's very good at that. So I can't really suggest anyone other than Wolff for number one in this one.
Yeah, I'm the same.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got an easy Toto.
Yeah, I think I think you're right. He might run away with this a bit like Mercedes this year potentially as well. But
he's the one who's been doing it for the longest as well. So he's had the biggest opportunity to do it.
But you also, if you look at the last, what is it for him, 13 or so years he's been in charge. When big names have left, when James Vowles left, for example, you didn't really feel a ripple effect down the company that you might have done. Important people leaving. But then to your point about every department being important, James Allison going there was a superstar signing, but you've never felt like they've put him on a pedestal above other people at the team. It's been, he's a huge part of what we do here. Like, Andy Cowell was similar. Everyone in the paddock knew how big he was, but it was never, here's our big superstar engine guy. And I think that speaks to that idea of we're all pushing towards the same goal. And when you leave, you'll get the credit you deserve, but we're not going to treat you like a superstar beyond anybody else here because we're all doing the same thing. So, and that's difficult to do. It's easier to do that when you're winning. What I think the real measure of Wolf's ability here was that when they weren't winning through the ground effect era, it felt like the team stayed together pretty well. All things considered. Yeah,
because it could easily have got lost. So we've got a clear number one, but second and third is quite tricky. I say there's some names on this list that have not had adequate opportunity.
Yeah,
perhaps to do it, and some of them, like Adrian Newey, is still the team principal for Aston Martin. That's not really what he does.
In terms of how good they are with people, I think we have to acknowledge Andrea Stella. I think we got to give a shout out to Laura Mackey at Red Bull. He's sort of taken over quite a heavyweight position and in very tricky circumstances, and made it look quite smooth. He's not really been fully tested yet. He's in the middle of being tested right now. Obviously, the struggles with the car's competitiveness and with the lead driver being so disenchanted with life in general. And he's got to be looking to the long term as well as the immediate future. So it's going to be interesting to see how Lauren copes with that. But I think he shows all the signs of being very, very good with the people. For me, they're the three names that I would put in the pot.
Yeah, I'd be happy with that. I mean, I think again here, this is one where Loudon, just by the very nature of team building, it's literally what he's been doing for the past couple of years. But that's not to say he's the only one on the list that could have done that. That just happened to be his primary job for the past couple of seasons. But I think that's one of the strengths of Loudon in that position. But yeah, I think, to be fair, this is one that you look at all those guys. I think the reason a lot of them are there is because this is something that nowadays you have to be pretty astute at. It's hard to get to this level without having at least a degree of this in your skill set. But yeah, I'm happy to go with those two.
Yeah, so we go Stella second, and then Mekies there. Ultimately, I mean, Vasseur strong on this. James Vowles has been very effective. Komatsu, I think,
Komatsu is a good shout as well.
That's something that in a few years' time he may have had the chance to kind of climb. Actually, historically, Flavio Briatore. I don't think I'd argue for him in the top three now, but if we were doing this in 1996 or something, 95, you'd say, because he was great at getting the right people in. Yeah. And when things were going well, he'd normally just leave them in place.
He wasn't popular outside of the team, but everybody that worked for him only had good things to say about him.
Yeah. So I think Briatore is sort of an honourable mention, but I'm not 100% sure whether today's Flavio Briatore is quite the same force.
Random left field one for you both. If Horner hadn't left Red Bull, and we, where do you think he'd stand in this? Because I think his great strength was outside the team, a bit of a pariah to some people, but had built a team of people that he could defer to their skill set. Obviously, it's fallen apart a little bit over the past year or so, but for 20 years, that team, operated in such a good way, and I don't think he ever claimed to be a genius at technical side, or I think his strength was more on that commercial side, definitely. But he was the guy leading the team, and I think he was really good at doing that. So I wonder if he would have been number one if he was still here.
I think Horner would have vied with Wolf for number one in both the categories we've done so far.
For a lot of them.
And quite a few of them. But they're all to a greater or lesser extent capable in this area, and again, some of them don't have the opportunity. So we've got our top three there.
Sorry, I didn't mean to try and take over the pod from you, Ed.
No, there's nothing wrong with that at all. It's so difficult to do this because you almost feel a bit harsh leaving out people who are very, very good at this. But by definition, if you're an F1 team principal, you're going to be very, very capable. Because there's no way you get anywhere near that job except in a weird set of circumstances unless you're very, very good at what you do. So, competitive field, I think it's fair to say.
So have you filled in your numbers?
I filled in the numbers. Okay. So, that's politics and team building done. Let's get into our third category now. Nate, this is probably the realm in which we most consistently encounter the team principals, and that's in terms of working the media. public facing, behind the scenes. Do you think that really matters, or is that just us elevating ourselves to some massively important status?
Well, the sport doesn't run without us, right? That's what we've always come to think. I think this is actually one of the most interesting parts of the way we've broken this down, because this now is actually one that I think there is a lot of difference between the team bosses. In part one, obviously, we were saying there was a lot of overlap. A good example of where this is still very important, I think, is Aston Martin. Now, we all agree that Adrian Newey is one of the all-time geniuses of the sport, but a lot of people wondered when he took that job, is that the face of the team that you want? Is that the character of the team you want to lead through a difficult point? And, during pre-season testing, when they needed some authority to kind of come out and say, here's what's happening, we didn't see Adrian Newey, didn't want to face the press, and we got Pedro de la Rosa and Mike Crack, who himself has been moved out of that job, kind of undermined a couple of times. And I think I know we then got Newey speaking in Australia, but I think it felt like it emphasised the problems a bit more, that no one really was coming out to get their hands around it. And then when Newey did, it was very much like, well, it's all on Honda, and here's these very revealing things about Honda. And you wonder if, and I feel like we're going to keep on saying it, but those two absolute heavyweights, Horner and Wolff, the way they deal with the good times is very good, but it's also the way you deal with the times when your team's in trouble. That is a really important part of the job. So I think that it is still very important, and actually you can get it really, really wrong. And James Vowles will be an interesting one this year, because when Williams were kind of on the up, he was very impressive. Now it's interesting to see the way he explains things. You said about the C-suite corporate. I'm not sure that always comes across in the best way.
I would say
down.
Vowles, with their struggles this year, has lost a bit of ground in this category, because he's been very good before, brilliant, in fact, before explaining all this stuff, and it's got really sketchy.
Yeah.
Do
you remember their explanation for why the car was behind schedule for testing? When you actually went back and read it, it was just like cliche central, which doesn't work when you actually need a serious answer to why your car is missing testing. So I think 100%, he was one of the names that stood out to me with Newey of not really being on top on this one.
Yeah, and it's strange because Newey is great to interview about technical stuff. He's a brilliant talker. So from that perspective, he's really, really good. But for the media role, the team principal, I'd agree with that. And in fact, there's a number in here who are really interesting to speak, like Ayo Komatsu. Gives great answers. I don't think he's sort of ticking all the wider media boxes. I think he probably ticks the media box for the kind of thing that I like doing and I'm interested in, but I know there is amazingly a world beyond me. So I'm trying to kind of judge this in terms of they need to be all things to all people, don't they, in terms of their role. And there's quite a few who are in that category. This is an interesting one, because I would contend that it's harder to do the media role than it was, do you think, Mark? Because you aren't necessarily, not just because the media landscape's changed, but first and foremost because when it was Williams Grand Prix Engineering, you were Frank Williams or you were Patrick Head, and what you said went, really, and what Frank Williams said went more because he was the majority owner, and you could you weren't having to do any kind of management inside your own team necessarily, or to shareholders above you, or any board, that kind of thing. So you could shoot from the hip a bit more and be a bit more, reactive and provocative in terms of what you do in the media. Whereas now you're speaking to a lot of people. You're speaking to the outside world. You're playing the politics as well through the media. So this connects to the previous category. You're also, and this is particularly important now, speaking to your own people. Once again, huge teams, and teams do read the media. It is a way of communicating with the media, with your people rather, through the media that looks like third party. So also there's benefit in them explaining what's going on, because sometimes everybody who's worked for companies will know there are times when you do not necessarily listen and believe or take seriously what's being said to you. But if it comes around the houses by that source, it can be more credible.
Yeah. It's a very important function. And also, it's also you have a much more trigger-happy media in the social media age, and headlines are always made very, very easily from taking things out of context. So you have to be very mindful of that. I think, as well as the individual person that's representing the team, you have to think also of the team of media people that they've got beneath them, the team of people that they've gathered. And I hate to say it again, Toto has got an incredibly strong team of people to do that. as well as representing the team himself. I think Andrea Stella is incredibly good at relating both to the media and, like what you said, relating to his team through the media and just reinforcing his values. I think Christian Horner did it in a more adversarial way, and he had his favourites, and he would, do it in a more maybe cynical, calculated way, which was popular with some, less so with others, but it did make headlines. But that was, that always had the feel of him being much more the sole representative of the team's position, with a little bit of running interference from Helmut Marko, but the media group there didn't seem to be as empowered, say, as at Mercedes, and they're sort of building something similar at McLaren, I feel, by the look of it. And Ferrari's always almost a unique case in terms of the media, just because of the pressures that it gets, the spotlight it gets put under by the Italian media, and it's the biggest thing in the in the sporting universe as far as they're concerned. So they have to dance a different dance there, and I think you're not quite judging the same things. But Mercedes and McLaren definitely.
I would say I think Wolf's very strong on this, but there is a small negative with Toto in that sometimes, because he does care a lot and he's quite a passionate person on certain topics, and sometimes he does say things he regrets.
Yeah.
When he's playing the game and he's so invested in it, and he'll say things, and you know that a few minutes later he'll be thinking, yeah. And sometimes even he says something, and then literally the next second says, "I shouldn't have said that."
Yeah, or don't quote me.
That's a weakness in this area. I still think he's a sort of podium contender, but I feel like that is a small blemish.
I think so, and I think it's why Horner got under his skin so much, was that Horner could elicit that exact response out of Wolf, which I think was a weakness. Wolf sometimes as well, I think he's playing to the gallery a little bit. There's that. I felt the same with Steiner. Steiner, when he was in charge of Haas, obviously that became a big thing for him, but you felt sometimes it was almost a bit too much, Gunther. I don't think it was a bad thing, but I think sometimes, especially with the Drive to Survive cameras around, you do wonder sometimes, are the guys that are very flamboyant in front of the camera, how natural is that now, and is it actually a beneficial thing? So I wouldn't put Toto number one either, but I am struggling to work out who to put above him. By the same
it's
token.
Very difficult because, and I think this is particularly difficult for us because we've all got relationships with different team bosses in different ways, and there's people on that list who I think are, from my perspective, very good with the media, but I don't think in the wider sense necessarily. For example, someone like Fred Vasseur, I think he probably undervalues the need at times, particularly when things were going badly, to be seen to kind of front up and not play it down. I know why he does it, but I think that didn't help on a few occasions last year. So there's a small weakness there. I mean, Andrea Stella's a strong contender.
Well, I think Stella stands out. Just he's, he speaks in a certain way.
Yeah. They're the top two for me.
Yeah. I'd say Stella then Toto.
Which order you put them in? I think probably Vasseur is third, but maybe a distant third. But again, that weakness you referred to, I think, has to be seen in the context of the usual Ferrari pressures. So it's probably sometimes easier to just disappear.
And actually, he's handled it differently to how Binotto did as well. To that point. So I mean, he's good at doing that thing as if Vasseur, where he'll just, someone asks him a very valid question, he turns it into kind of a joke back, which is annoying for us when you're sat there, but actually it can, like you say, take the sting out of some of those stories. So, I think that's a fair top three.
Okay, that gives us a handy top three there. But again, some of them are limited in terms of how empowered they are to speak, etc., or whether they've got the authority to shoot from the hip in the way they want to. So, I think that's probably the hardest category for us to work out. So let's move on to technical understanding now, Mark, because we have seen recently a wave of team principals who are a bit more from the engineering side. What do you think that's telling us about the job and the way it's evolving?
I think it's become so complex that you need to be on top of it quickly. and you need to be from an engineering background, ideally, to actually get it. But the sort of characters that can combine that engineering knowledge with the demands of a leader and the inspirer of people, I think it's quite a rare combination. And while Adrian Newey is for sure the most brilliant technical guy of every team principal of all 11 team principals here, I wouldn't put him top as the best technical manager, because it also involves your relationship with the people around you and in inspiring them and managing them. And I think there are probably others that are probably better at that. But
I think when we're talking about technical understanding for a team principal, I don't think Newey's even podium, which sounds like sacrilege because he's.
But it's not what he's. But his thing has been sitting alone in a room with a drawing of a car and working out the best way. It's the thing, and that's why him being team boss was such a strange call to a lot of us, was because it didn't seem to suit his wider skill set.
Yeah,
so I think that's totally fair.
I mean, he's I think if you were to pick the top technical mind in Formula One, it is Adrian Newey. But just within this frame of reference, I think he's disqualified him. And there's basically 6 what I would call frontline engineering team principals, which is Mekies, Stella, Newey, Permain, Komatsu, Binotto. They're the 6.
Yeah.
So I think straight away they're the 6 contenders.
Yeah.
For us, we've knocked out Newey for almost non-technical reasons, ironically.
Well, Komatsu's a really good call. If you see when he, taking over from Steiner was such a big character and such a big part of that team, was really a superstar beyond, Haas's station, really, if you're being really blunt about it. So to take that role over, very, very different style, and the transformation that Haas has had under him, that what was Steiner's last season, 23 or was it 24? It was 24.
All the years run together.
Yeah, they do since COVID.
This is
Steiner's last year.
What year are we now? Yeah, it's
20. Yeah, so it would have been 24 was Steiner's last year, coming into 25 with Komatsu. That sounds right. If it's wrong, then apologies. I'm not. This is why I'm not a regular on the pod. But the transformation that season, it was about setting expectations right at the bottom. But his understanding of the technical team and how to unlock that team really has shone through. So I think he's a really good example of how that shift that Mark talked about, is more and more important now. Because for all of Steiner's, plus points in terms of probably putting Haas's name on the map and, attracting maybe sponsors to Haas, I'm not sure he was ultimately unlocking that technical department in the way that he needed to be. And Komatsu's done that very well.
I think I would be inclined to propose Stella 1, Komatsu 2, and then I think number 3, maybe it's Mekies or Permain, because I think they are still very, very heavily engaged in the technical side. I mean, Binotto at Audi rather is, but he is more CEO, isn't he, and project leader, whereas I think Stella and Komatsu are very embedded in the engineering side, so are Permain and Mekies. So.
Yeah, it's like what you said earlier. If we were doing this 5 years ago, Binotto would probably be, just because of that journey up. But yeah, I think now it feels like he's not that anymore, even though that is his kind of bread and butter.
So who should we go for third, Permain or Mekies?
Or what do you reckon? Permain and then Mekies?
I feel they're very even.
Yeah, exactly. Toss a coin.
And Mekies has gone teams, but also into the governing body as well, which suggests a certain level of skill in this. The ability to work both sides of that coin. So maybe that gives them an edge.
Okay, well, we'll slot Mekies into third place. So yeah, Stella, Komatsu, Mekies, the top 3 for technical understanding. As we head into the final 2 categories, as we attempt to decide who is F1's best team principal, quick update on the scores. We've got Toto Wolff and Andreas Stella dead level in equal first on 68, Laurent Mekies on 30 points. We've then got Mattia Binotto and Ao Komatsu on 18, and Fred Vasseur and Graham Loudon tying on 15. The rest have yet to score, so it's brutally competitive, this. Nate, let's get on to driver management now, probably the most brutally public aspects of it. You have to sign them, keep them happy, manage them, in some case literally, given the way a lot of this relationship works. You want to prevent the schisms. So this feels almost more challenging and complex than ever.
I think it is. And I think, again, to the point that both of you have made, the media landscape has changed so much as well. Fans are so acutely aware of all the dynamics between the drivers, the team bosses, and the driver market. It feels like it gets earlier and earlier every year that we talk about how that's moving around. But there's so many different ways to come at this as well. I mean, driver management can mean a lot of different things. I mentioned earlier about Andrea Stella and Papaya rules. You know, the way they had to navigate that, I feel like they had to be brutally honest with Piastri and Norris at different points about, you know, what was happening, but also the way that I think Stella was important in that. He had to convince both Piastri and Norris that the intentions of the team were good behind every decision. Whether or not they got them right or not was also moot, but I think Stella handled that quite well. You know, we saw Toto Wolff maybe struggling sometimes to deal with Hamilton and Rosberg, but actually did that quite well given the circumstances. But then driver management can be a bit different as well. I mean, if you look at James Vowles, the way his pitch really got Carlos Sainz to join, that's maybe an underrated version of driver management, is actually managing a driver's expectations before you've even signed him. And
he's probably pulled off the biggest driver signing coup in that regard, shall we say. I guess you could maybe say Hamilton to Ferrari, but I think Sainz to Williams, given the relative status of the two.
100%. And I think that it was so left field, wasn't it, Sainz to Williams, that I think it speaks to that point. And I think Vasseur and Hamilton having a relationship that went back a longer time obviously just helped that out. Whereas Vowles, it seemed that it was really just the power of his conviction and belief in the Williams project that really convinced Sainz, because you know the Audi project was there for him as well. So I think that's where you can look at this from very, very different points of view. It's obviously the management of your drivers in the here and now, but it's also the way you're kind of, you know, I suppose managing all the other drivers around you at the same time, because as we know, these conversations with drivers and teams are just ongoing all the time, aren't they?
The ultimate test for this is when you have to control two drivers in the same team, both going for the World Championship,
which hardly any of them have done.
Yeah, exactly.
There's no manual for how to do it either.
No,
right?
so Toto's done it, Andrea Stella's done it. So by definition, they did it quite successfully. I would say by definition they're the top two. You
could argue that another one who's done it in a slightly different way is Flavio Briatore, albeit going back in the past.
Yeah. Yeah, but he did. It was a one-car team, effectively, wasn't it?
That's a way of doing it.
Yeah.
But then he's an interesting example in the modern case, because I think Netflix shone a light on that, you know, on his style of doing that with Colapinto. I think Alpine suggests that maybe it was slanted in a certain way, but it shows you that maybe he's still very much from the old school of the way he manages a driver, and I don't think that quite computes nowadays with the way, especially with the younger drivers. I feel like they need a bit of an arm around them a bit more than maybe in the old days. It was a bit more brutal, a bit more cutthroat. So in that sense, I think driver management has just changed as well. You're dealing with much different personalities and characters, and and everything's under the microscope now. You know, even things like that. There's a boom mic hanging over your head somewhere. You know, and a camera picking up the way you talk to your drivers.
Yeah, it's quite difficult if we're going to go with Stella and Wolff as 1 and 2. It's quite difficult to pick between the two, isn't it, Mark? I think you can make a strong case for either. Wolff's done it more. But Stella's done it very well.
Wolff's done it more, and he's also probably acted more on his own in terms of choosing the drivers in the first place, whereas Andrea's probably done that in conjunction with Zach Brown. So sort of responsibility shared there a little bit. So if you say, you know, who's it on, who you recruit, and it's on you if it's wrong.
I think Toto, the way Mercedes managed the year that Lewis was basically had left the team but was still there, but then also the decision to promote Antonelli was, I mean, it was so scrutinised at the time. It was throwing someone in the deep end like that, and I think there were times in year one that we all thought that was complete lunacy.
It was bold, and I think also I mean, look, it's looking quite clever now, but I think another feather in his cap is the way they brought George Russell in.
Yeah. Definitely.
You know, George says, okay, I did 2 years too long at Williams. I felt I was ready after 1 year. But nonetheless, he was brought in, and he was brought in progressively, and he was absolutely ready to win races as soon as he appeared. You know, he made that one-off appearance at Sakhir at the end of 20, and absolutely amazing. So I think, just on sheer volume, I think Toto gets this one.
When he's also the only team principal on the list who's had to replace a world champion at the last minute, you know, when Rosberg kind of stood up and said, I'm not racing. And, you know, he's always joked his phone was ringing. He could have picked anyone there, and there was a real pragmatic approach to that. It would have been easy. We all say, why didn't he give it to Fernando, or what, you know. But the pit, I know he also worked with Valtteri Bottas as well, which I think you alluded to the fact that some of them literally do manage drivers. But that
quite a lot of them have those sorts of connections.
Exactly. But that pick was actually really important because Mercedes went and carried on dominating for the next few years. But had you got that wrong, if you'd created another Hamilton-Rosberg situation, especially as Ferrari in 17 and 18 were much stronger, it could have been quite problematic for them winning another championship. So I think that's, again, it speaks to how long he's been doing it. But I think Wolff has to probably be number one for that reason. I
think the challenge here is who's the P3. I think there's a few people you can make a case for. I like the way Komatsu deals with the drivers, but again, relatively small stuff. So I think Fred Vasseur.
Fred Vasseur's got a nice way with the drivers. He manages them.
Yeah,
their moods and
Fred Vasseur strikes me as that no BS kind of guy, doesn't he? Yeah. I think they know where they stand with him. I imagine you go into a meeting with Fred Vasseur and you leave and you know exactly where you're standing is with him. And I think that whenever he's worked with any driver, you get that impression. Yeah,
people speak very, very highly of him. And I think he understands drivers and he understands how to simplify the task for the drivers. In fact, both, all three of the Ferrari drivers he's worked under in the race drivers have spoken of that kind of thing and how they quite like the clarity he brings to the whole thing. So,
and you get the sense with him, and it speaks to what we were saying about him in the media as well. I think he finds a lot of the ecosystem around Formula One quite silly. There's a bit of it where he's just like, I don't really get why this is so important, and that is refreshing for drivers as well. He's a guy that really, to that point, just sees it as very black and white, cut and dry. Here's what I think. Here's what you need to be doing.
Well, of course, he spent a very long time as a team boss in junior categories, so that also gives him a really good understanding of drivers as well. I mean, a lot of them these people have done versions of that or worked drivers, but I think Vasseur's probably unique in the spread he's had, particularly of working with young drivers, which is so important because one of the things you get is there's always a big age gap between the team principals and the drivers, and drivers are coming into Formula One at ludicrously young ages, really, and you're kind of middle-aged in F1 if you're 28. So that's a challenge, and obviously Vasseur being the age he is as well, not far off pension age if he wanted to be. It's that's an achievement. So let's put him third. The final category is commercial, Mark. Now, this is still important. Money makes the F1 paddock go round. It's still vitally important, big part of the team principal's job. How important do you think that part really is? Because no matter what type of team principal you are, you end up having to dip into this realm.
Of course, yeah. I mean, some of the team principals in this list don't have to concern themselves with it. It's not within their remit. And I think this is probably true of Andrea Stella at McLaren, because that commercial side is run very, very ably by Zach Brown. Toto is a part owner of the team. So he's just less than a third, because he sold a little bit of his third. Just less than a third owner of the team. So he's a stakeholder in the actual entity. There's the old-fashioned commercial go-getter going to generate, which Flavio Briatore is, and I think is still probably quite adept at.
He gets a lot of deals, and he's brought, even before he came back in with Alpine, he was bringing deals to Formula One as a whole. Some of those big partners that they've got in have been Flavio Briatore.
And Aston Martin has got some really impressive commercial signings over the last few years, but they're nothing to do with the team principle. So, it's a tricky one to judge this. Toto's in the mix. I'd say Flavio Briatore's in the mix. Ferrari's different. Again, it plays to its own rules. It's such a massive brand that that's not really the team principal's role there.
He has to do a lot of commercial appearances, and a lot more than he would like.
Yes,
but he's fine at that.
He's not generating.
No,
he's not generating them, so it's a different role. So I don't think he really figures in this discussion in this area.
It's probably actually the clearest area where you see very, very clear splits in responsibilities, don't you? Because Stella doesn't do any of that because Zach Brown's brilliant at it.
Yep.
So it's completely off the table. It's impossible for Stella to be on the podium in this category.
And the mindset has shifted. I mean, if you look at the undoing of Christian Horner, a lot of the root of that was the commercial desire of the Austrian side of Red Bull to really control that part of the business. And you mentioned Peter Bayer earlier. He does that for the junior team, and it was actually, I think it was the Austrian Grand Prix last year, wasn't it, where Oliver Mintzlaff from the Red Bull wider company sat down with Horner and said, "You need to give up some of the commercial stuff." And I think Horner made a joke about, well, you can go sign Mike Crack if you want that kind of role. But that was a really fascinating clash of the two mindsets and the shifting landscape of that. You're taking one of the old school, team bosses that did everything, and you're saying, actually, no, we don't need you to do everything. We're happy to do the commercial side. So Wolff and Briatore really stand on their own here. Briatore historically, but also he came in, didn't he, and just cut that team to pieces where there was a lot of waste and a lot of things they need, gutted the Renault engine project as well. That's why he was brought in, and it's the reason he was is because he's so effective at doing that. So I think those two guys to me stand out, and I think a lot of those other people, you're right, they probably don't even touch the commercial side and don't need to.
But Graham Loudon's probably worth a shout. He's very commercially astute, and has probably played his part in getting it where it is.
Yeah, I think that's fair. So first decision 1 and 2, I'm almost wary of saying, but I feel like probably we have to put Flavio number 1.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree.
I think when
it has to be on this.
Yeah, when you come back to a sport purely because of your standing in that regard, it's hard to argue against it. I mean, when you think of Briatore, you think of a deal maker, don't you? So I think that puts him ahead of anyone else. Yeah,
and I think when it comes to the third slot on the podium, there's not many contenders actually. Loudon's been mentioned. James Vowles probably is part of it. He's very much the sort of corporate commercial. Well, he's very strong on that, but
he's working with De Ruyten as well, isn't he? And you wonder how much the commercial side of things he's looking after, away from them. But
I don't think he's your guy who's going out and getting deals.
Yeah, exactly. So I think, but I know what you mean. He's of that other class. I think Loudon's a good call. Just building that team in the way he's kind of had to do it with with Cadillac and with the wider entity there. But again, I'm not sure how much he's going to be in those meetings going forward anyway.
Well, that's a fair question. I'm just doing a little bit of adding up now to make sure we have the correct scores. Graham Loudon's come out.
Yes.
I wouldn't say surprisingly well, but he's not perhaps the first person that people think of. So we've got the final scores, and I think there's some interesting conclusions to draw from this, because we have got first is Toto Wolff on 111 points. Second is Andrea Stella on 86. And then we've got Fred Vasseur, Laurent Mekies and Graham Loudon on 30 points.
Nice.
So those are our top rankings. We've got Adrian Newey, James Vowles, Alan Permain, unfortunately haven't scored points in any categories, which is a little bit harsh in some ways, but Newey's not a team principal.
But it sums up, I think doing it like this actually shows you how unsuited he is to that role.
Yeah.
And how, I'm sorry I said it earlier, but unsuited to his wider character and his skill set, that role is. Kind of almost diminishes having him at the team in that role.
Well, he's fallen into it by default, hasn't he?
Yeah.
So, I think we'll see in time that his role will be slightly different.
But it's interesting, isn't it? Because he's at a team where they've struggled to really understand the very concept of team principle, what they want it to be. So it's not surprising that's happened as well. Whereas with Mercedes, on the other side of that coin, you've never felt the need for them to split the role up. It's always been so clear that all things run through Toto Wolff. So
once Ross Brawn.
yeah, exactly that. Then that was the one clash, wasn't it, early on? It probably isn't surprising either that the most tenured team boss wins that quite comfortably. It shows you the power of that at a team.
Yeah, and the closest analogue to an old school team boss in that he is a part owner.
Yeah, and if Horner had still been here, I think he probably would have been on that podium.
I think
as well to speak
I think
to that
it
same
would have been
point.
Wolff and Horner first and second, and we then had a whole debate about who was P1, P2 in that.
Only one way to find out.
I'd say there's a
Harry
non-zero
Hill.
chance of that happening. So it is interesting. Wolff and Stella far away, and then there was, I said all three of them, but Vasseur, Mekies and Loudon are the three squeezed onto the third step of the podium, but a long way behind. And again, I want to stress, we're not saying that those who didn't score well aren't very, very capable, because they're all very, very good. Some of them just don't necessarily have the tenure or the opportunities to score particularly highly in this slightly arbitrary way of looking at it. But the whole point has been to try and understand the evolving role of the team principal and the different skills. And yeah, it says a lot about, I think, the value of having a Toto Wolff type figure. But I think the fact we're getting less of those is not necessarily a mistake so much as just the way that the teams are changing, isn't it? You can't
just the evolution of the sport.
Yeah, you can't have that sort of role.
And you think when Toto Wolff, whenever he does step away, I don't think they'll replace him he won't be replaced like for like. He will be, that role will be a relic at that team. You'll then naturally split it because that's the way to go. So I think it is just changing completely in that sense.
Yeah, and also the role is split so much. There's probably the role Frank Williams did in the glory days, let's say in the early 80s, when Williams was kind of first on top in Formula One, having won his first championship in 79. And he was doing a lot of commercial stuff, bringing in deals. He was making driver decisions. He was doing everything apart from the engineering side, because the whole model there was Frank Williams does all of that. Patrick Head does the engineering stuff, but they're way more complex now. So Frank Williams is probably, all the stuff he did is probably about 10 different people in terms of department heads now. And even what Patrick Head was doing is multiples. Such is the added complexity. And I think the other fact is just that the team principals now, it's almost treated like a badge that needs to be put on someone, because it's not always in the org chart. You're often CEO and you get a team principal role, because kind of as an F1 team you do need to have someone who's a team principal, which is why Newey's got it ultimately. It's kind of, we have to give it to someone, I might as well take it. He's not doing anything that's very clearly team principally, apart from perhaps that by the odd press conference.
And when he steps away from it, he'll still be higher on the org chart than whoever they bring in that role. Right, that's the thing with him, isn't it? It's not like when he's stepping down from it, he's just removing that from the bottom of his email signature that says he's no longer team boss, but just managing technical partner or whatever it is. Yeah,
still vitally important. And I wonder if we come to do this in, let's say, 5 years again. We like recycling ideas, so we probably will. How many of those names will still be on that list?
Yeah.
And how much things will have changed, because people have had opportunities to stake a claim in categories. I think James Vowles is a really interesting one.
Yeah.
Because how Williams, we have to assume at the moment, because he's done a very good job there, we have to assume this is kind of a little bump and then it'll be back on the upward trajectory, but it might not be.
It feels like a make or break spell for him, doesn't it? A little bit. Just you made the great point earlier that it's been a bit weaker, his kind of persona, since this has all happened. So we'll see how he manages it. But and it feels like Toto Wolff's kind of on a bit of a glide path slowly away from that role as well, slowly moving things around. So I think in a few years, I wouldn't imagine Toto being there unless he really still loves winning that much. In 5 years' time, might stay around. Yeah, and certainly then Fred Vasseur, is he going to still be running Ferrari? Because he might. A, there's the risk of being Ferrari team boss, and B, he might just think, well, I've had enough. I've see out this latest contract and go and do something else. He's certainly got the kind of freedom of choice in that. So I think we will see it changing. And I can see a point where almost the team principal thing, which is already, that aspect of the title is already almost an honorific in some ways, isn't it? Almost fades out. And perhaps it purely exists there for just public facing and Drive to Survive and just giving an easy name to people, because these are big companies, and really the key people are the CEOs, this kind of thing, because we've not mentioned hugely influential people in these teams, or only mentioned in passing. Zach Brown. This is Zach Brown's McLaren as much as, if not more than it is Andrea Stella's. Oh, 100%, 100%, yeah. Well, he's the that's the funny thing, isn't it? He's team boss, but then when we write articles, often we'll put McLaren team boss Andrea Stella. When you actually think about it logically, it's like, well, he's the team boss's boss. He's the so yeah, you're absolutely right.
But those two work well because they understand what each other's job is. That actually they are kind of Frank Williams and Patrick Head.
Yeah.
When Brown says the key moment for building that team was when Andreas Seidel went to him and said, "Oh, I'm leaving." And he suddenly realised I got an opportunity to promote Stella, who I think he'd identified quite early as being that person.
Yeah, he'd offered him the role before.
Yeah, that's right.
And he'd said, "No, I'm not ready for it."
Yeah,
so
which is very Andrea Stella thing to say.
Yeah.
And then Zach went back. He said, "Right, you ready for it now?"
Yeah.
Yeah, probably. I think I am.
Yeah. I didn't realise that. It's interesting. Yeah, that's and I mean, the difference has been night and day, hasn't it? I think there. So,
but within that, Stella has stamped his authority as well. Because I must admit, when he was appointed, I thought this is a great choice. A lot of respect for Stella. I called him a continuity candidate, and actually I was wrong on that, because he changed a number of key things that needed to be changed to let McLaren take that step from kind of upwardly mobile, getting to a good level,
Yeah.
to being the level they're at. He's been key there, and all credit to him and Zach Brown for recognising it.
Well, and for letting that happen as well, because ego can so easily cloud your judgment on that. And if you're in Zach Brown's role and someone comes in and says, well, I want to make changes, it would be easy to say, no, this is my team, you're just the figurehead. So I think it speaks a lot to how good Zach Brown is at that as well, to have recognised that in Stella.
And so just for a final summary, Toto Wolff first, Andrea Stella second, equal third, Fred Vasseur, Laurent Mekies and Graham Loudon. Then Ao Komatsu and Mattia Binotto tied next. And then, the Flavio Briatore as well. This is not.
It's been tripping over himself over the maths.
It's not. My handwriting is a huge problem. Yeah, it's Ao Komatsu and Flavio Briatore are both on 18. Yes, that is correct. So counting skills not good, but that's the way
That's
it is.
next week's episode.
If you watch the video version, it'll be up on screen, so it'll be much easier. But even if the maths is a bit sketchy, the picture is very clear. So thanks very much, Mark and Nate, and thanks to everybody for putting up with the questionable maths. Still lots to talk about here on the Race F1 podcast, so stay with us for everything you need to know from the world of Formula One.